Myself and Elias will take us through this panel. So first I'm going to give the floor to Elias to introduce himself. He's the new chair of the EDF Youth Committee.
Hello everyone. I'm very happy to be in this panel and welcome to my hometown. Welcome to Stockholm. I hope you had a good time this morning and I hope you enjoyed your lunch. And I hope you also get the opportunity to explore our beautiful city here in Stockholm. My name is Elias Tebibel and I am part of the EDF Youth Committee. I am the chairperson. In addition to this, I work as an advocacy officer at the Swedish National Association of the Deaf. In this conference, it is critical to include the views of young people and on the topic of AI. AI is really an exciting opportunity, but it's also very scary at the same time. Because AI has access to so much data, and for the future, it becomes so much important. Myself, as a deaf person, the issue of equal access to information is critical. And my question then is, will AI ever be able to solve this challenge for me? Is it possible for AI to provide equal access for me in my different avenues in life? So in today's society, I do understand that, we live in a community where most people speak and it's an auditory heavy place to live in. And for myself, I use sign language, and most of the times the sign language is not available in text. And society should understand that sign language is the native language of us deaf people. It's our mother tongue. So I really think it's interesting, this debate that we will have. And I think we will start with our first presenter, who's Jutta Treviranus, and she'll join us online. She's a professor at the Faculty of Design at Ontario College of Arts and Design University. Welcome to this panel. Are you online?
Yes, thank you. I am here.
Introduce yourself.
I'm wondering whether people can hear me. Wonderful. Okay. So as I understand it, one of the questions that has been posed to us as a panelist is, what are the most urgent and critical risks that AI poses to the rights of persons with disabilities? And thank you so much for this opportunity to speak on this topic. As you mentioned, I'm the director of something called the Inclusive Design Research Center, which is a center in Toronto, Canada. And it's a center that I started to proactively intervene in emerging socio-technical systems to ensure that they're designed inclusively. And one of the most disruptive and impactful of these of late is artificial intelligence. And in talking about the most critical risk, I feel that the most critical risk for people with disabilities is that AI amplifies, accelerates, and automates patterns of the past. So this includes past unfair discrimination. It also thereby, by automating it, exonerates people of responsibility for this discrimination. And this applies to all forms of discrimination. People with disabilities, however, feel the extremes of both the opportunities and of the harms of AI. And one of the harms that we've found in our work that is not addressed in any AI regulation so far is what we've called statistical discrimination. AI uses statistical reasoning to make decisions, to find an optima, to choose the next word, and to flag security risks. And people with disabilities differ from the statistical average or the average patterns of the past, or including the past successes, which is often what an AI is trying to optimize. It's trying to do things that we've successfully done in the past, but more efficiently, effectively, and accurately. And from a data perspective, unfortunately, the needs and characteristics of people with disabilities are at the very jagged edges of the normal distribution. And the needs of one person with a disability are very different from the needs of another person with a disability. Most people, men and certainly people that have the most extreme needs, are outliers within that statistical distribution. And this is particularly harmful when there's decisions about people, such as who is invited to a job interview, who qualifies for a mortgage, whose essential services are funded by governments, or who is flagged as an anomaly for tax auditing, security clearance, welfare fraud, or even child custody determinations. But even low impact decisions like distribution lists, bus schedules, city planning decisions about using data, media choices, product features are generally made against the interests of people with disabilities, because statistical reasoning means majority rules, and people with disabilities, being different from the average in some way and being different from each other, are tiny minorities and outliers. This majority rules decision-making, or statistically determined evidence and proof, is not new, of course. It is part of most of our conventional processes, but AI mechanizes and automates this so that there is little opportunity to make exceptions or request special treatment. If you're an outlier, statistically determined evidence is wrong. Much attention has been paid to data gaps, data deserts, and human bias. These also have an impact on people with disabilities, but this is about more than data gaps or lack of representative data about people with disabilities. Even if we have full proportional representation in the data, data algorithm will still rule with the statistical average. And it's also more than past human bias and stigmas being introduced into the labels, rules, and proxies, but people with disabilities also face these forms of discrimination. And one of the things that our center has been doing is looking at how do we address this? Some of the ways we're trying to address this are by changing the algorithms and the optimization. One is an experiment that we've been playing with for some time that I call my lawnmower of justice. If you think of the data used to train an AI as a hill or a three-dimensional bell curve or Gaussian distribution, we mow it like grass so that there are no more than a certain number of repeats of any one element. This means that the AI needs to pay attention to the whole distribution, and we take away the advantage of being like the average. A data manipulation is used that's sort of like leveling the playing field. Another strategy we're exploring is to move from data exploitation to data exploration-based decision-making. In AI hiring system, this means finding candidates who are different from the current employees rather than candidates that are the same as the current employees. AI hiring tools usually try to match past successes or the patterns or personas of profiles of previously successful employees. This leads ultimately to a monoculture and means that people with disabilities are eliminated or not considered for hiring. By asking the system to diversify the candidates, we prevent monocultures and encourage the system to choose more people who are different, which includes people with disabilities. And I hope that wasn't too long.
Yes, thanks. I'm sorry, Jutta, can you see us at the moment or not?
I can see you, sort of.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll come back to you again for a further question afterwards. Thank you so much.
Jutta, thank you for your presentation. We will go over to our next panelist, who is Mr. Gerard Quinn. He's the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities at the United Nations. So, sir, you have called AI the fourth industrial revolution, And at this time, persons with disabilities must not be left behind because we will never be able to catch up because of this rapid development. You have said, for example, that the use of facial recognition can short-circuit the system of reasonable accommodation. What did you mean by this? And could you perhaps provide us with an example? And could you also explain to us what the possible risks are in this statement that you've made?
Thank you, Elias, and thank you for this wonderful panel. Yes, we issued a report in late 2021 on the balance of risks and opportunities presented by artificial intelligence for people with disabilities. One of the beauties of having the UN Treaty is it gives us the capacity to look forward, not just to look back. And that's incredibly important because many seismic shifts in the past have slipped us by. And for example, in the third industrial revolution, which is the World Wide Web, going back to the early 1990s, people with disabilities were not embedded from the beginning, which means we've been playing catch up ever since in terms of disability web accessibility law. So if we allow this opportunity to pass by in the initial stages of AI, I really do think that people with disabilities will not just be left behind, but they will have no chance to catch up because AI is going to be transforming our economic life, our social life, our cultural life, perhaps even our political life into the future. So now is exactly the right time to be engaging on this topic. This is not the traditional topic of privacy or access or accessibility or the digital divide. It's much more profound than that. It has everything to do with the terms of coexistence, whether in the economy or in society and so forth. And just in essence, AI, machine-based learning, allows patterns of human behavior to be detected much more accurately. It allows for predictions to be made about human behavior. It allows nudges to be put in place to nudge human behavior in certain directions. And machine decision-making will make decisions even behind your back without you knowing it. And as our previous speaker mentioned, one of the problematics is the nature of the data sets upon which these decisions are being made. But I would say that also it short circuits one of the main accomplishments of comparative discrimination law in the past 30 years, which is reasonable accommodation. You are, for example, precluded from proceeding in an employment context without you knowing it and without any reasonable accommodation being paid to your disability. Furthermore, it contains what people call a black box. That is to say, we don't even know these decisions are being made against us, which means if we don't know, then we've no basis upon which to form a claim. And that means our remedies are pretty much illusory to non-existent. I will say, and I'll stop here, that there are also a number of huge advantages to artificial intelligence. And one of the tricks going forward is to make governments aware of the balance of risks and opportunities. 2 or 3 of these opportunities we itemize, and one has to do with the individualization of services in the reform of our service paradigm into the future. And another one, which is quite fascinating, has to do with mental health and avoidance of coercive measures in mental health, with amazing research coming out of Melbourne University in that regard. So I think, and we put together a list of recommendations, but they're mostly about bringing civil society together with the tech developers, the tech users, and governments to try and figure out what the optimum way is forward in guarding against the known discriminatory impacts, but also maximizing the liberating potential of AI into the future. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Gerard, for giving that thorough explanation. I now hand over to our third panelist, who's Quinn Noori, who's the Artificial Intelligence Officer at EDF. And perhaps could you explain to us or give us examples of how to involve OPDs in the design and the development of artificial intelligence? Could you please take us through that question? Thanks.
Do I turn this on? Thank you. Hello, can you hear me?
Keep talking and it'll wake up.
Wow. Thank you, Elias. Hello, everybody. My name is Kave Noori, and as Elias said, I am AI Policy Officer at here at EDF. I just started working in January, and to answer your question regarding examples of how we can involve persons with disabilities in the design and development of AI, I would say that we can play a very crucial role. In one way, we have to, for example, emphasize that when you are trying to accommodate the needs of persons with disabilities, like our previous speakers have said, my colleagues in the panel, you cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach to disability because we are all very different, and that's also very important to recognize when systems are being developed. So. One really important thing that I think is necessary is, for example, that we really need to complement teams that are developing AI systems with people who have other expertise when it comes to people knowledge. And I still want to hope that there is some way that we can solve the issue of like with representational data, like Jutta was speaking about, but even in that sense, it's important to know that people with disabilities are also people of color, women, sexual minorities, and different groups as well. And we also need to take the intersectionality into account. And when a developer wants to develop something, I think it's really important, or EDF also thinks it's really important that that they consult organizations representing persons with disabilities, and you can have focus groups, for example. Disability experts are also important, but they cannot speak for everyone. They can help you maybe identify which groups of persons with disabilities that are most relevant to how much time do I have? Yeah, okay, I will go on because I have two more points I want to make. Go ahead. Thanks. Like one thing as an inventor is also that you need to remember that you are not the end user. I want to take an example of the sign language glove, which is a glove that that only looks at the shape of your hand and the position. And there have been several of them developed. But in sign language, for example, if you make a difference between a statement and a question, it's, at least in Swedish sign language, you raise your eyebrows and then you also tilt your head. So that's just rudimentary, that it doesn't capture the full like aspects of the sign language. And I think that we can also prevent many hard work being done in vain to invent things that are not useful. So I think there is a mutual interest to actually get it right. And that's why you have to ask persons with disabilities who have the lived experience of having a disability. And accessibility testing is also important. So both when you're planning for a concept of a new invention, but also afterwards is really important to both test user interfaces, but also like the underlying technology. If you're developing a speech recognition algorithm, for example, you also need to include people with speech difficulties or different accents to also make this inclusive. So just in summary, AI needs to be developed in collaboration with persons with disabilities to actually be able to be inclusive.
Thank you very much for that. Is the microphone picking up my voice yet? No? Can everyone hear me? Is the microphone picking up my voice yet? Now it is, I think. Yeah. Thank you very much, Kave. So, Jutta, I'm going to come back to you now again, just in summary. So Kave was talking about the need to involve organizations of persons with disabilities in AI development. And we heard already from this morning that we're using AI all the time without even realizing it. And most of us wouldn't feel equipped to go into a meeting with developers and talk about how to actually ensure that AI provides maximum opportunities for persons with disabilities and avoids discrimination, because we usually don't know enough about it, about what's happening. To have machines and technology making decisions on the basis of averages, as Jutta pointed out, is very dangerous, because the averages are based on the average. And she was talking about it amplifying the past, which is quite frightening, because we know many of the practices, the policies, the ways that people with disabilities have been included or not from the past is not what we want to amplify. But now I'm going to, and then Gerard also said, the decisions, the discriminatory decisions taken against people with disabilities, we won't even know about, because that might be a job recruitment website that has decided you are not average. You've never known that you've been discriminated in that process, so you cannot go to court in the same way as you could if you were directly discriminated in an interview or in the workplace. Even we know that's not hard. So we know this is a big problem for persons with disabilities, and it's also a process which is already ongoing and already shaping our lives in the world around us. But I want to go to another element of it. So Jutta, I'm interested to see, because you talked about amplifying the past and automating the past. And so the opportunities for persons with disabilities could also be amplified. There could be positive developments. So could you mention any artificial intelligence application that could be positive for inclusion of persons with disabilities, or any area of innovation that you think brings something positive in the future?
Well, as I said, people with disabilities feel the greatest opportunities, but also the greatest harms. It's sort of the extremes of both. And unfortunately, because there are such inspirational stories about how AI has helped people with disabilities, that's often used as a way to exonerate the bad things that might happen with AI. But certainly AI has been used to provide access to features, functions that someone might previously feel barriers to, such as, of course, we all know about voice recognition, pattern recognition, and many of the other areas where AI has become almost a life-altering tool. And to add sort of the other side to that, though, the minute that you stray from that average where the tool has been trained, so if your pronunciation isn't quite like the training model, or if the environment that you're in is very poor and unlike the environment that, say, a pattern recognition for someone who's blind has been trained in, is not like that, an area, it doesn't work. So even there, we are unfortunately having difficulty with the way that AI works. It ends up being that the people that would benefit the most from the systems that are helpful are the ones that for whom it works or it doesn't work very well. And the same actually applies to the many applications that are used to try to address AI bias, which is probably a follow-on question, and I won't go into that. But it's undeniable that AI definitely has the potential. One of the systems that we're working on is something called the Baby Bliss Bot. Bliss Symbolics is a universal symbol language that's used by people who are non-speaking, who have cerebral palsy. And we're trying to train a chat bot that will not come with all of the nasty stuff. So in a sense, we're trying to raise a chat bot that is responsibly raised, that can be that can assist a community that is community raised, and thereby will help in conversing in bliss symbolics, will improve the fluency, will provide a way to create additional meaning making. And I think that's where we need to explore, is how do we create bottom-up training of responsibly raised AI systems.
That's really interesting. Thank you for giving us that. I could see you gave us the positives and the negatives around vocal recognition, which I think can apply to many other forms of artificial intelligence. But coming afterwards was I think the inspiration point you had there was the idea of the disability community being part of creation of AI that's really going to work and serve their needs for inclusion, for communication. And you mentioned also in your first response that there wasn't artificial intelligence regulation in the world yet that tackled issues like discrimination. Later in our program this afternoon, we're going to talk about the new EU proposed legislation on AI, so we can go more into that. But I want to turn to you now, Gerard, if that's okay, to think about another element of this. So I was wondering if you could imagine scenarios where disability rights organizations could use AI, for example, to monitor, review compliance with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Do you see this as a potential tool in any way?
Yeah, thanks very much, Catherine. I think the reality is that at the moment, the AI algorithms tend to utterly ignore reasonable accommodation in as much as disability arises. By the way, a fascinating kind of piece of evidence is coming from a group in England called Face Equality International, which is about people with facial disfigurement and how the algorithms misinterpret facial disfigurement as untrustworthiness on the job. And these are a classic group of people who are then eliminated even from consideration for a job, perhaps without them even knowing it. And I think one of the challenges for developers is, how can we turn that around? Technically speaking, if a disability is detected, then how can the next question be asked, which is what reasonable accommodation would assist in enabling a person move forward, let's say in the employment context or otherwise. And that is a conversation that civil society needs to be having with the developing community, because it's surely within the wit of the technology and the technologists to actually incorporate that into their design. I will say there's a complication here. You mentioned earlier on, Catherine, and I will stop here, that sometimes you might even not know that decisions are being made about you and against you. And it's very hard to reveal the source of these decisions. There's a hidden reason for that, and it has to do with intellectual property rights and how these trade secrets are actually guarded. And that has proven to be a barrier in actually enabling people to bring forward cases where they have meritorious cases. The only thing I would say on that is the UN Disability Treaty calls for a rebalancing of intellectual property rights with equality rights. We've already used this in the Marrakesh Treaty. That's what the liberalization of copyright's all been about. So there's an open space there to actually, for civil society groups to get involved in the liberalization of international trade law and intellectual property law in order to enable us to detect where these discriminatory algorithms are based and coming from and their impact. Sorry, Catherine, that was a very long-winded answer.
No, thank you very much for it. I'm going to go to you now, Kave, to ask you why it's important for organizations of persons with disabilities to understand the risks of harm and how opportunities can empower us and improve our lives. Or if you have any reflections on what Jutta or Gerard were saying, also feel free to add.
Thank you, Catherine. So I actually do want to add to something that Gerard just said, which was about the intellectual property laws. And maybe it's a question, but I have been reflecting on if one way, because I guess there are also strong powers that think that you need to protect this intellectual property and to also accommodate a little bit to that. I've been thinking if something that a law professor from the Netherlands, Frederik Souderwijn Borgesius, once wrote in a report for the Council of Europe about that consumer organizations, I believe, and researchers should have the right to research on algorithms and test drive them in like a secure environment, because many times it's only when you test drive an algorithm that you can see that in certain cases they're, well, I mean, for people with disabilities, it might be often, but because we are outliers in statistics, maybe that it's only apparent when you test drive it, is my point. So that's a reflection I have. But then also why it's important for us to understand the risks and harms. It is basically because as I learned from reading the report of Gerard, but also listening a bit to Jutta, it's that we need to address the risks before we can focus on the positive things. And that's why we need to learn, although maybe many people will feel that, it's really complicated with how to understand technology or so. I really want to say that it's not really about having a very deep technical knowledge. It's more about adding these soft skills and these skills about how people with disabilities may behave in different contexts. And that's something we need to add to those teams that are working on the technical things. But then for us to be able to advocate for our rights, but also to make sure the legislation protects us, and also to be able to give input to developers, we also need to have knowledge about how AI affects our human rights, because it's only with our help that it's actually going to be able to be disability inclusive, so that we can give advice to politicians and to inventors. And one thing I really want to underscore here is that when we provide our expertise, then there is also the issue that you need to also fund this type of activity, because we are already struggling within the traditional system of like social security and these kind of things. So if we want to make it happen, we also need to create an environment where we can actively work on these issues, and that it's not, yeah.
Thank you very much. So we have more questions for you, Jutta and Gerard and Kave, but I also want to see at this point if there's anyone in the audience who would already like to ask a question to anyone. We're ready with more, but I just wanted to see if I see any hands up. Yeah, I see Rui here on the right-hand side of the stage. Thanks very much for bringing him a microphone. And I also see, I think, Christian down at the back there. Magdalena has a mic for you. Is there anyone else just in this round? And Giampiero. So we have 3 questions in this round of questions, and then I'll let our panelists answer. It was Rui, and then Christian, and then Giampiero. Thanks.
Hello, good afternoon. My question is not a question, it's for Professor Jutta. I know that she is working with a project with people with cerebral palsy in Canada to learn how to interact with them. And my key is to manifest my interest to work with you in the cerebral palsy Europe to get more data to get better algorithms to get better answers for people with cerebral palsy, because we need to remove the gap, that gap from the average, from the limit. So we need to make the difference smaller, to get a better algorithms to lead with people with disability, in this case, cerebral palsy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ree. And so, Christian, you have the mic.
Hello, everybody. My question is, what are the possible applications of AI in supported decision making, and if there are any developments in that regard at this moment?
Great, thank you. And Giampiero.
Yes, Giampiero Griffo from DPI Europe. The question is one philosophical reflection. We know that the standardization in the use of technology produce barrier. If you're reflecting about the past, we understand that this is a very risk for person with disability, because frequently the programmer no have knowledge on disability. But the artificial intelligence is more complicated, because we know that any people in the world are different. And that is exactly one thinks, how is possible to reduce for an algorithm these differences? And for person with disabilities, differences are more strong, because the different form of habilitation that person have developed are not normal. In the sense it's normal, but not recognized normal. And in this sense, I think one of the way is exactly the customization, the flexibility, not one algorithm, but the possibility to personalize the use of the different tools on the basis of the capacity of the person and the need of the person. The last reflection is maybe you know that block the research of the intelligence, artificial intelligence, for the risk. Maybe we need to reflect about the solution that in the science fiction produced Isaac Asimov. They say we need the rules, the 3 laws of the robotics. We need to understand how this artificial intelligence are in there to make negative impact on the person and human being. And that is all to introduce human right people. I think it's 3 questions, very complicated to make a result now, but it's a question that we need to do to understand the future.
Thank you very much to the 3 of you for your offer and also the questions. So I'm going to go in the same order again. Jutta, you have the floor first to answer what you can or respond what you can. And then Gerard and Kave, I will come to you then after. You have the floor, Jutta.
Great. So a wonderful set of questions. And we would love engagement of any of the communities of people with cerebral palsy in our work. This is something that I've actually been working on since the early 80s. And one of the distressing things was that the voice recognition of dysarthric speech was actually far better back then than it is now, because back then it was a trained, individualized voice recognition system, and we used it quite successfully with many people who could produce repeatable utterances that were only understood by family and friends. But because you're now in a voice recognition system pushing against all of the other data, it tends to be not as well recognized. So we are working on that, as well as I was saying, the system that is attempting to produce or support more fluent production for individuals with cerebral palsy that have limited voluntary movement. And anyone interested, we welcome participation. Supportive decision-making. We are working with several groups within Canada on ways of both, or a whole range of strategies for informed and supported and collaborative decision making. And again, please reach out to me. I can give you further information about that. IRIS is an organization that is focusing completely on that, and I can provide links to that. In terms of the philosophical questions, customization, yes, is a really critical way. So anything that allows the technology or supports the technology in recognizing diversity, designing for difference. And as you pointed out in the last part of your provocation, that is to the benefit not just of people with disabilities, but it's to the benefit of everyone, whether it's sustainability, whether it's addressing disparity, whether it is addressing many of the other crises and harms that are there. I think one of the things we should have learned from the pandemic is none of us are safe unless all of us are safe. And the attempt to customize or to design things such that they work for a range of stuff gives everybody more choices and allows us to be more responsive when the next crisis comes, when the next unexpected thing comes. The unfortunate thing about customization is that it is also used in a negative way, just like friendship can become Facebook and sharing can become Uber. Personalization and customization has been used to create a cushion to not expose us to dissonant or disagreeing voices. Only recommender engines expose us only to people like us who think like us. And that, of course, can lead to tribalization and polarization. But customization to support the functions and the needs and the facets of our own personal needs is something that hopefully we can shape the AI to address by creating communities of people with disabilities that are informed and understand artificial intelligence.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Jutta. And you're already helping us a little bit today by participating in our event to help us in our first thinking about this collectively. Gerard, I want you also not only just to answer questions which resonate with you that were just answered there, but in case there's any other reflections you have on what Jutta has said, things that you think are important for us to consider.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Yes, Jutta mentioned IRIS in Canada, and they're doing fantastic work on supported decision-making, and they have been for a number of years. There's also a group in the University of Melbourne that's doing a lot of good work on artificial intelligence in the mental health field, including supported decision-making. So I'd be very happy to connect people with them afterwards. Jean-Pierre's question is characteristically deep, let me say that, and it's very, very welcome. And I think on the face of it, there is a contradiction between the DNA of the technology, which is always looking at standardizing data, and the actual reality of life, which is that we each live, idiosyncratic lives of our own. And the promise, I think, or one of the promises of artificial intelligence is that if it's harnessed properly, it can actually provide outcomes that are genuinely meaningful to us as individuals. And here I think it's very important, or will become very important over the next 10 or 20 years in the transition we're already experiencing in our service paradigms, in service design, service delivery, service outcomes, because of course, one of the goals there is personalization and the tailoring of services to each individual life story. And I think that's one of the pot of goals to be searched for in helping us to transform our care system or our service system into the future. Catherine, you gave me an open invitation to add any other general reflection. The reflection I would add is that you, as in the European disability community, need to be interacting with the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, in Geneva to make sure that the intellectual property protections under international law do not become a barrier to you probing more deeply how the algorithms work and how they impact people with disabilities. The other thing I would say is that the developing community is very important, but it's of the essence of machine learning that it grows beyond the original intentions of the developers. It assumes a life of its own, which makes it all the more important that you're able to look under the hood and figure out how the algorithms are working. And the only way you can do that is to liberalize or lift the shield of intellectual property. Back to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Kave, did you have anything you wanted to respond on those questions that were there?
There were so many smart things that were said that I feel a bit lost, but I will take the issue of the philosophical question of standardization and spin it freely. What I think about standards are that we should remember that they are also value driven, as you said. Like take just the simple thing that if you have an economy system for a municipal, you put in it that two people have to sign a bill to pay it. There is a value behind that we think that people will do corruption. And one reflection I want to bring to the table for further thought is basically that technology is never neutral. We just think it is, but it's like our decisions to use it or implement it, and also the decision to actually have an inclusive design approach or to not have one is also value driven, conscious or unconscious. And that's something important that we should think of and feel empowered that we as persons with disabilities, we are experts who have the lived experience, and nobody else can provide that expertise without us. So yes, feel confident, and we together we can learn about how AI affects our human rights. And you don't need to be have a computer science degree to join the fight or cause.
That's reassuring. So now I have another question. I go to Jutta first, just with one specific thing, and then afterwards, if people have questions from the floor, I'm looking as well to just now to see if there's any hands raised. Does anyone? So I see Klaus has his hand raised there. Anyone else? So if we can have a microphone for Klaus. I wonder, is there a particular procedure or methodology that can make artificial intelligence disability inclusive? Because you seem to be, you're mentioning, Jutta, you've been working on this for many years. Are there tried and tested methodologies?
That's a difficult question. I think one of the things to understand about AI is that it is doing the things that we've been doing before, but doing them more effectively, efficiently, and automating them. And so it becomes a much more fundamental and philosophical question, because we've always been using statistics to make decisions. Our democratic decision systems are majority rules. The individuals with disabilities, we've always been trying to create standardized learners. We've always been trying to create replaceable workers in our societies, in the societal conventions. And so one of the things that I think AI does well for us is it provides a very, very stark mirror of what we've been doing all along within our civilization, and allows us to step back and say, wait a sec, where are we going? And how are these conventions that have become unconscious and that are completely embedded in all our habits of civilization, where are they getting us? AI takes those things that have been called fuzzy, philosophical, not hard science, and actually puts them into the realm of hard science so we can investigate them further. But you're asking, is there a way to address the discrimination, etc.? And that's something that there isn't a complete answer for. I think the admonishment that Kave offered, that it's not a one-size-fits-all, applies here as well. I don't think there's a silver bullet or a fix or a solution to this. AI is moving so quickly. There are new barriers and new opportunities emerging all the time. And so what we need to do is we do need to get involved. We don't need to know the how, we need to know the what of AI, what AI is doing. And we need to address everyone that is involved. One of the concerns that I have is there is a very burgeoning AI ethics industry that is emerging, but disability is not part of that agenda. The statistical reasoning is not considered. The strategies that are used to determine whether an AI is ethical are cluster analysis. So you take a very bounded identity group and you compare the performance of the AI with, say, women versus the general population, someone who's Black versus the general population. And if there's a significant difference, then it's determined that there is an ethical bias. But that strategy, that cluster analysis to certify something as ethical, does not work when you're talking about disability. And so we need to inject ourselves into those discussions and to ensure that when things are determined to be ethical, or when there are attempts to deal with discrimination and with AI, that people with disabilities are part of that consideration.
Thank you very much. So I was going to give the floor, but I'm not going to, because we're going to have a coffee break very shortly. I'm sorry about that. I made a mistake with timing. But before we break for coffee, I want to see, Gerard, did you have anything else that you wanted to finally say? Or I'll give you the floor then afterwards, Kave, as well. We continue to work throughout the whole afternoon on AI, so hold your question for the next moment. Gerard.
Just to make people aware, there is a new group based out of London called AI Ethics and Disability, and they seem to be doing quite an amazing job at bridging the normative gap between the traditional AI ethics dialogues and a disability dialogue. Also, I would say that it's important to bear in mind the whole separate sphere of business and human rights, because I think one of the challenges is to inject some of the normative principles of business and human rights into the tech developing companies. And we talked a lot about that in our recent report on transformation of services, whereby we imagine service providers as a multi-billion-dollar industry, and therefore should be accountable to the business and human rights model. Similarly, I think the business and human rights model has a lot to say about the kind of dialectic we develop with the developing community in the years to come. Sorry, Catherine, back to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Gerard. Kave, anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to tell us before we break?
I think I'm just going to reiterate that if you want to work on AI, great. If you're a youth organization, I just wanted to mention that the Council of Europe, they are actually prioritizing how AI will affect the human rights of young people. So there is opportunities to apply to do study sessions and similar. Okay. So I just encourage people to get involved.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to give the floor back now to our master moderator for today, Lotta.
Thank you.
And thank you very much all for your attention and your participation.
Big applause to this panel. And thank you, Elias and Catherine, for this, to holding this panel in a very good. So my head is popping now. There are so many things I've been thinking about listening to this. And as Catherine said, my mic, yes, time is works, sometimes not. Now, yeah. But we have the rest of the afternoon to think about and discuss further on this very exciting topic, AI. So now we have the opportunity to take a coffee break, and what we call it in Sweden? Fika, thank you. Half an hour to be back here, 3:30. And before I came in here, you know, there was something outside, the sun. So if you have so take a quick one out just to see the sun outside this, the venue. So back here, 2:30. Thank you.